Welcome everyone to this session of Capital HQ. I have the pleasure of welcoming Rob Cossins, CEO and co-founder at Scribe. Rob's journey began at British Telecom as a finance intern back in the day, where he showcased his knack for innovation by implementing significant cost savings. He then honed his experience and expertise in credit risk at Barclays Investment Bank, eventually rising to the role of VP. And in a bold move, Rob transitioned to entrepreneurship by moving to Antler's incubator before co-founding Scribe. Under his leadership, Scribe has evolved into a pivotal data platform, reshaping how founders, funds, and lenders access and utilize private company information. Rob's unique blend of financial acumen and entrepreneurial spirit has positioned him as a thought leader in the realm of startup growth and investment. Welcome, Rob.
Hey, Hugo, good to see you again.
Yeah, you too. Look, let's get straight into it, right? So, I mean, it'd be great to hear about your personal journey before we dive into your opinions and expertise in finding investors with data. So, could you share your journey from a finance intern at British Telecom to investment banking to now CEO of Scribe?
Yeah, absolutely, and happy to be here and share a little bit for Wholesale Investors audience. So, yeah, my background is primarily finance. So, studied economics at university, and when did effectively what a lot of people were doing, which is finding, a good job within finance that you find kind of intellectually stimulating, interesting, and well remunerated. So, I went in as a graduate in 2011. So kind of still post financial crisis, I suppose, and learned a huge amount about analyzing companies. So at its most basic level, that's what I did for 7 years. So 3-4 years in London, and then I moved to Germany and worked on their sort of German client base for 3 years as well. So got a good chance to sort of look at companies lending or M&A, leverage finance, all these kind of big, wonderful terms that sort of make the world go around. But one of the things that I sort of noticed in my time there that was, I'd been there sort of 6-7 years, and I was thinking, the way that we do things isn't really changing at all. That process on how banks analyze companies hadn't changed at all, and it got me thinking. I was like, where does this kind of go? Where does the innovation come from? And at a certain point, you think, okay, maybe I'm the person to do this. If someone else isn't going to build it, let's go and build it. So I left the industry in 2018 and started Scribe alongside my co-founder Emmanuel in sort of early mid 2020. So just before the pandemic, we started working together. So we met, as you rightly mentioned, on an accelerator called Antler. And they do a fantastic job of bringing together technical people and commercial people together at the same point when they're ready to start a business. And so Scribe really started out as a way of automating my old job. So what can we do to help make this process quicker, help companies get loans faster? And yeah, fast forward to today, we have a large bank of clients that cover all sorts of organizations, all the way from large banks down to funds and increasingly founders as well. And so we're as you mentioned, we are a platform for insights about private companies, and we also license that technology to funds and banks to allow them to analyze their own privately held clients and their private companies as well. So I suppose in short, we're really, really good at structuring horribly unstructured data. And we use AI to do that. So we've got a team of engineers that deploy artificial intelligence in pretty much everything that we do. And yeah, we unlock that value for organizations. So specifically, the focus, I suppose, of this particular conversation is around data on angel investors. So one of the things that we've done is structured a data set of over 150,000 UK angel investors and trying to solve some of these problems that founders face with data. So yeah, that's us kind of in a nutshell, I suppose.
Fantastic. And when you left your position at Barclays to join Antler, I mean, do their incubator program, that initial vision of what you wanted, was it the same as what came out of it as its first iteration, or was it completely different?
It's a really good question. So before, it's interesting just to add a little bit of context. Before Antler, I was working on sort of my idea, various ideas for about 6 months, and I found it really hard to find a co-founder. Finding an engineer, finding someone who would go on that journey with me and build that product. And so coming into Antler, I sort of had a pretty clear idea. I was like, this is what I want to do. And the one thing I've learned, I suppose, is through Antler and then subsequently, and we're still learning that, is that the more you speak to your clients, you understand better their problems and what they're facing and how you can build solutions to those problems. So what we're doing now, although we do a lot of stuff that is very similar to what I left to do, we've learned so many things where either the market's not been ready or the product's not quite been what a regulated bank would want to buy, and all these things. So our product has changed immeasurably. When we started out, we were nowhere near building a data set of information about companies. That wasn't even on the radar. But the more we spoke to people, the more we figured out how broken it was and how many problems we could solve just by using a bit of clever technology. So yeah, to answer your question, being around founders, you really appreciate just how quickly and agile you have to be to build the right product, and one that people are going to pay for and that you're going to be able to scale. I suppose is
Great. And I think, this is not the point of our discussion, but I'm very interested in your co-founder, Emmanuel, right? Because it's what you're saying here is still, it's very much what you wanted to build, plus, right? What was Emmanuel, when you met him, what did he want to do? Did he want to become a co-founder, or did he also have an idea of what he wanted to build? Or did he just want to become a co-founder and build great product? What was his thinking coming into this, and how did you guys align?
Yeah, it's a really good and important question, I think, in terms of aligning with co-founders on what you want to do. I mean, so his background is academia, so did a PhD in artificial intelligence, then a postdoc in London. And one of the things I think, he had built and done lots of this stuff in academia, but he wanted to see some of that technology implemented in the real world. So that really was sort of his driving motivation. And I think one of the things that when we were first starting out, he joined a lot of the client calls that we have. Now, that's quite unusual for a CTO to be joining client calls. And he doesn't anymore, but certainly at the beginning, we spent a lot of time understanding the problems. And I think we're still working together. This is nearly, 3.5, 4 years old as a company. But I think what drove him was finding the right commercial, vessel for some of his technology. So we deployed lots of stuff that I didn't know was possible until meeting him. So he very much has a stake in our product development, what we can do. And I think that's important for any kind of technical partner, I think. The other thing I'll quickly mention is he had worked on a couple of other ideas beforehand, and none of them had really gotten significant traction or had the right sort of commercial route. And I think that was also motivating for him to join someone who maybe understood a problem area quite deeply. And so, yeah, each engineer is different, but I think in our case, the synergies are very, very clear to me.
Right. And I think, why an incubator? I mean, I know the value of it from an outside perspective, but why an incubator? Was it to find specifically a co-founder, or was it more so to hash out your idea and get feedback? Was it those two combined? Why an incubator?
Yeah, for me, it was mostly about finding a technical partner.
Right.
I knew there was no way I wanted to do this journey on my own. Entrepreneurship is very difficult at the best of times. And one of the problems I think that organizations like Antler and Entrepreneur First and to a lesser extent YC solve is this timing problem. The value unlock from having a smart commercial person and a smart technical person, bringing them together in the same room, is unbelievably high. It's extremely high. Like, what lessons an incubator takes them might be useful to some people. You take what you need from it. But there's no way we would be working together if it weren't for an accelerator incubator like that. There's no way. And I know that because I spent 6 months knocking down every door, spamming every engineer on LinkedIn. Like, it's hard. Like, you can't just find an engineer to build your idea. It doesn't really work like that. You need someone to come on that journey with you, understand the problem, build for that problem.
Okay, and one last question before we actually move on to the topic.
Yeah, of course, that's fine.
How long before your decision to be like, yeah, I'm leaving this and I'm joining Antler's incubator program, did you start thinking about this idea?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about within while I was at Barclays for probably about a year before I left, and also I was attending lots of events on this kind of stuff. So yeah, it was quite a long time. That entrepreneurial itch just grows and grows and grows, and I think I if I had seen that moving internally, maybe there'd have been something where I could have helped that. But
Yeah,
these industries are very static, and you want to innovate.
absolutely.
Mm.
And okay, so now moving on to a bit about Scribe, right? So you mentioned that at the start it was really to solve a problem that you had seen in your industry, so investment banking.
Mm.
How has its current ecosystem of also tailoring for startups,
Mm.
founders come
Mm.
about?
Yeah, so we were effectively creating information on companies. So we started out, and we're still doing this for lenders, is we structure financial information from sets of accounts
Mm,
for lenders. So that means that they can underwrite a lot quicker. It's a really simple use case, but it's an extremely hard problem to solve that to date no one's really solved properly. So that's what we do. They save time, they accelerate. And one of the things that came up the more we were talking to both funds and lenders was that um, we had this kind of IP, I suppose, of like, we can structure this horrible data at scale, and we appear to be one of the only companies, if not the only company, that can do it at scale. And so we use that technology to create a data set. And to be honest, the more I sort of demoed this to friends and other founders, the more they were saying, I want to pay for this. Like I want to pay for this. Nowhere else I can find this. And that's really how it got going. And so we launched that only 6 months ago. Since then, we've helped about 110 founders find angel investors who were struggling to raise or just building around. So yeah, it happened by accident, really.
all right, and the real question here is, have you used your own data set to find your own investors?
No, but I wish I had had it. We didn't have that data at the time, so I didn't. But yeah,
Future funding
we've
rounds then.
potentially, yeah. I mean, we've now got information on. Well, we've got the most comprehensive data set available, so maybe we will.
Maybe, well, maybe at the end of this conversation, we'll go over a quick demo, especially since it's come out quite recently. I'd love to see that. Can you maybe explain, you mentioned AI, how it's
Mm.
involved in every area of the business. Can you maybe just explain how your platform uses AI to specifically match maybe startups with the most suitable angel investors
Mm.
based on industry and stage? And if you have any success stories that you are allowed to share.
Yeah, sure. So I suppose when we think about our founder offering, we've got to think about the underlying data, like where's that coming from? And so in our case, that's coming from company filings. So what organizations will upload to Companies House on shares issued, the names of who owns them, and also how much they paid for those shares. So that's the sort of underlying data. And then we've obviously got information about the companies themselves. So we use AI in a couple of different ways for that process. The first is we have a fairly complex ledger system that will build up what's happening in their cap table over a period of time, and also who's paying for what shares. So we make a series of kind of assumptions and structure all of that data. I mean, it's happening in real time, by the way. Our technology will go to Companies House, scrape and structure. We use computer vision a lot. So computer vision is a pretty well established AI piece of AI tooling where you can pull numbers and text out of PDFs,
Yeah.
and the accuracy is really good now. The other side of it is how do we make that data relevant for founders or investors rather who also use this data? And what we will also do is we will use technology to, if we have a company we don't know, and that's the case, we use fairly, like this is commercially available AI to improve the industry classification of that company. So let's say you've got a new company that's, I don't know, Tech First Limited, and they're a SaaS company. At the moment, there isn't a SaaS code on any registry, so you don't know. So what we do is we have a URL for that company, which we will identify using technology. We then have an AI that goes to the website, scrapes the first page of text, and then it classifies it to one of the new industries. And we use, quite openly, we use GPT-4 to do that step.
Yeah.
And it works really well. That's not sufficient to do millions and millions of companies, but it works very well. And so that means that if you're a SaaS founder, you can go onto the platform, type SaaS, and you've got a list of SaaS investors.
Yeah, which helps a lot, right? Because SICs are outdated, to say the least.
I'll give you a stat. There are 150 SIC codes for manufacturing, and there is one for software. So if you're a medtech investor, SaaS investor, like consumer fintech, whatever.
What if you're software for manufacturing?
That is a great question. We might have to do some work on that.
That's fair. Do you have a success story which you are able to share?
Yeah, sure. So founder, I won't name the company because I haven't asked them, but we had a founder just before Christmas was closing a round and used our platform fairly heavily and closed 65K in checks across 2 angel investors within the space of about 3-4 weeks. So he had a round that was going well, and he was really struggling to find enough investors to sort of top up, and he managed it through the platform. So he had a good success story. Again, great founder, really on it, knew what he was doing, and that helps, right?
Of course, but when I think the space that you're in and the space that Wholesale Investor are in, it's easy to sometimes forget that 85% of companies don't get past Series A, right? So success stories will take any that do well, right? So it's So I mean, even that is remarkable, right? You've already helped one founder, probably more, but you've already helped a founder close up a round of 65,000, which is remarkable.
Yeah, that was, I suppose, the thing to add about that, and the thing that interests me about this data, and whether we're the companies to do that, or whether, because we partner with a lot of organizations as well who will help steer founders. The interesting thing to me is, because you have this additional level of data that's never been available widely to people before, can you move the needle on successful fundraisers? Yeah, and that's something Wholesale Investor are doing as well. Like, if you can do that, amazing, because there are a lot of great companies out there that maybe just don't know how to fundraise, or they don't know how to sell, and they just learn how to sell. And that's the interesting bit for me. And
it's also for investors lacking deal flow, right?
Absolutely.
So both sides. I think if you drive efficiency and visibility, then transparency, then I'm sure that number 85% will probably drop drastically within the next 5 to 10 years. So yeah,
I think so. If I look at the UK, there's plenty of capital. There are deep pools of capital in London, but if you look at what you pick an investor from our data set at random, you go on LinkedIn. Usually, you might have one mutual connection. There's someone senior in finance that doesn't want to put themselves as an angel on. There are a lot of people in the UK who are active investors, but you just don't see them. And if each one of them has one more investment than they do at the moment, the innovation that unlocks is huge. There are a few steps to get there, but that's the bit that I find quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So now moving on to problems with finding investors. Maybe talk about your experience, but also the people you've spoken to, right? So if we can limit it to 3, what are the most significant challenges founders face when looking for investors? And this is perhaps in the context specifically of first-time founders.
Yeah, I suppose, the first problem is not knowing where to find. Like, if you've never done this before, and you mentioned first-time founders, but it's obviously quite relevant, but most people don't know where to turn. They don't know where these professional investors exist. So what happens with a lot of early stage investors as a result of that is they do a friends and family round. So they do a round of 150K, maybe 250, of friends and family, or people that are already in their networks. And that's good, but what it means is that they maybe haven't got experienced angels around the table who've seen it, who know what it takes, who've got the right networks to help them on their journey later. Yeah. So first problem is they don't know where to look. The second problem is that the people that are sort of put themselves out there as angels or advisors, firstly, you can't get through to them because everybody else is. It's the competition for capital is really, really big. And so if you're targeting, a famous angel investor, you're not going to get through because they are bombarded by outbound. And also, there are a large amount of people who are advisors. So they might have angel invested in one company, they put angel on their LinkedIn. And what that means is that they're not really investing, but they'll take the call. And it turns out they're a fractional sales advisor or something like this. And that's a huge time sink for founders, a huge time sink. I suppose the third is, and I would say this is a problem on the founder's side rather than the investor side. And the problem is really founders consistently, and myself included, underestimate just how much work it is to raise a round. And that's a problem because they just want to be building their business. They don't want to focus on fundraising because they get hit back. People say no all the time. And yeah, that's the third, I suppose, big problem is trying to sort of make sure that founders are aware of just how difficult it is and how much work they have to put in. And that's I suppose, a knowledge gap that they're sort of aware of it in an abstract sense. Like, yes, fundraising is hard, but it is always a magnitude harder than you think. Certainly for us raising our funding round, it is the same for every fund.
Yeah, it's what you're saying is very interesting because I spoke to a repeat founder, a couple of them, and this came up in conversation when they were coming up with their business plan for their second, third, fourth, fifth business, whatever it was. And in their business plan, one of the top priorities with product, with sales, with marketing was fundraising, right? And from the get-go, fundraising was a top priority. Even one of them said, even before we had an MVP, we had a list, a targeted list, done our research, started reaching out with the idea behind it, with the prospect of it, just so that when we could go, we hit live and everything was ready to go. And I found really interesting. I think that's something that, as you said, people underestimate. And I've never been in that position, but I've spoken to a lot of people who have been in the position that you're talking about. And, it can take months and months and months. And, unfortunately, in some cases, it takes so long that you have no time for your business and that business has to close. So I think I don't know what they necessarily help at incubators, but I think that should be one of the things that needs to be addressed from the get-go for first-time founders, is really push the agenda of putting fundraising as one of the top priorities.
Yeah, and as you well know, not every business needs to raise equity.
Of course.
There are plenty of companies that do well despite that. But I suppose the one my sort of stock answer to this is the power of community. Like, a lot of founders think that the way that they'll get capital is through certain investors introducing them to others, which does work. But ultimately, the best source of investors, I think, is building out your founder community. And so you'll realize that everyone's going on a similar journey. No two fundraising rounds look the same. They're all a mess, effectively. I've not met anyone, and I know a lot of founders, like, I've not met anyone that did like a clean fundraise that wasn't chaotic or messy or delayed in some way. And so I think building out that founder community is critical for this, because you'll see how others are approaching it and you'll be able to benefit from their networks as well.
Yeah, I saw this morning. I forgot the name. I got it in a newsletter. Anyways, but one company raised, within hours of opening their fundraising round, they've raised 25 million from Sequoia and A16Z. Within hours, it was done.
I suspect that's marketing. I suspect they'd had some of those conversations before, but yeah, it does happen.
But I mean, that's like 1 in a million.
I'm sure they were doing very well as a company.
Yeah, I'm sure they are. If A16Z and Sequoia came in with 25 million, then it has to be something.
Yeah.
Look, you've just talked about not just any investor, but the right investor, right? And we've talked about how Scribe manages to break down SIC codes to specifics. But could you maybe elaborate on how you guys help address the issue of connecting the right investor and not just any investors?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's important firstly to define what like the right investor means.
Yeah.
And people will raise from angels for, well, you know, for capital, but they will also raise it for expertise and find people that are aligned with their mission, vision, that will be able to take them on to the next level, whether that's opening doors to client introductions, or if you're a consumer business, you know, people who will give you the distribution that you maybe don't have as a startup. So angel investors are an amazing way to kickstart your business, you know, in a B2B business through opening doors, or a consumer business through distribution. In terms of how we do that, I mean, the two major advantages, obviously, the first is industry, which is very obvious. Like ultimately, if you reach out to someone in the same industry, you know, they're likely going to be more interested in your company than if you just approached a random investor. The other area is also ticket size. So we show ticket size in the platform, so you can see what stage, what kind of companies, what kind of check sizes, and that gives founders a bit of power as well. They have power in the house because they can see whoever it is invested 25K last year.
Yeah.
So that gives founders a bit of an edge. The third way, and founders have been doing this, but only really the 1% have been doing this, is because the way the data is structured, you can see who which companies they've invested in. So when you speak to them, or you're connected with them, or you outbound them, you can say, hey, I saw you invested in X and I thought you'd be interested in X. Now, some investors might say, oh, you know, how did you know that? Where did you find that? Obviously, response as well, it's publicly available. But most investors will say, wow, you've really done your research. You know, your outbound is highly relevant to me, and therefore that will convert much higher. So, for example, when we have founders that are using our data, they'll reach out to maybe 200 names. They'll often get 3-4 meetings, something like that, which for cold outbound is a very, very good hit rate. If you're getting meetings and having conversations with investors, and obviously the more you increase the funnel, let's say, the more likely you are to get checks and meetings.
Right. And I think this probably ties in a bit to my next question. What advice would you give to first-time founders seeking angel investors then?
So
apart from using Scribe, which now I think it should be a given having heard this conversation.
I mean, I would, as a first-time founder, I think it's never too early to reach out to investors. Not about a round, but I think if I was a sort of I am a first-time founder and still making lots of mistakes, by the way. But if I was starting out again, one thing I would do, and I have done a little bit of this, but I think I could do it much more, is I would reach out very early on in our journey and target people who forget investors and forget money. I would target people who are very senior in an industry or a sector that I'm looking to build in. So, for example, if you are building a social network, you reach out to the head of growth at Facebook and you say, hey, I'm building this. I would love to speak to you and see what views you have. You do that with 20, 30, 40 people. They're your angels, really, regardless of whether they have money or not. Like that's nothing to do with our platform, but it's a really effective strategy that I've seen work many occasions. Founders will often, you know, first-time founders, it doesn't matter if people are, that it's their first check into a company or whether it's their 100th check. But through those conversations, not only will you get a lot of valuable feedback and a bit of a sense check on your idea, you'll also build important bridges, that may help you fundraise. And I suppose the follow-up point to that is that they obviously feel that like they learn how they can add value to your business, and therefore they're more likely to invest. What I think founders do, and you're particularly likely to do this if you're doing a round, is you're pitching all these like main angel investors who invest in like loads. And as I mentioned before, they're not only bombarded, but they're less inclined to maybe come on your journey with you, and there's less of a sort of valuable relationship there. They're just an angel investor who might be able to open doors here and there, but ultimately, if they've got lots of investors, they're probably going to be less useful to you in the long term, outside of, if they're working as a separate sector. So that I suppose that's what I would advise people to do.
It's a good piece of advice. And talking about the trials and tribulations of a founder, let's go maybe into particularly challenging or enlightening experience you had while maybe securing your investments for Scribe.
Yeah, I mean, two examples come to mind, and I think this is really common. I'm not going to sort of name, but we've had investors pulling out of our round. That's pretty common. You see that happen fairly often. They get cold feet, or they've just lost conviction or whatever, which is fine. They're on their own journey, and sometimes they just have the money at one point and then maybe don't have the money next. It happens all the time. So we had that in our round. And also, I suppose this is more of a general point. For most of the investors that have invested in us, they've invested for a reason, and they're great. All of our angel investors are brilliant. But really, there is persistence required, I think, in how to get people on board at the right time. And so, certainly 3, 4, 5 follow-ups helps. Investors have very few touch points to figure out how you are as a founder.
Yeah.
And that's something that I underestimated, definitely, in terms of like how persistent you have to be on this stuff and how resilient as well. Because ultimately, the longer you're fundraising, the less focus you have on the business, the more you're potentially running out of money as a company. All of these things add up.
Yeah. Look, I'd like to speak a bit about how using cap tables to find angel investors, which I think is one of the foundations of the data that you guys have, right? So 2 questions. I'll ask. The first one is, how can founders, number one, leverage cap tables and data to identify potential angel investors? And 2 is, what are some unconventional insights that data from cap tables can reveal?
Yeah, and I think this is something the best founders have been doing for a while in the UK, just because the information is available. But cap tables, obviously, every founder will know, and every fund and investor will know, they contain a list of all the shareholders of that business. Now, what makes them really interesting is, well, they tell the story of that company today, particularly in the sort of tech world. But usually, if you have a company, a very specific company, you think they've done really well. Like, I don't know, I remember doing this for Wise, for example. And I looked at who their shareholders were. But you can tell usually, if someone's got a large percentage, chances are they're probably the founders, who might be useful to reach out to. But if you're looking out for angel investors, chances are they'll have a smaller percentage. So what you can do is find that company and look at who sits on their cap table and how much percent they had. Now, this is useful, and on our platform, you can see all this data, but that just gives you very, very specific people that you can reach out to. Put very simply, and there's real power to that, I think, because obviously that link is always there. Like, hey, I see you're involved with this company, would love to chat. And you start seeing similar names and things like this. It's very useful data.
Yeah, and we've touched upon, and you've brought up the outreach strategies, right? And I agree with you on it. Although sometimes founders will still reach out to these biggest angel investors, and it might work, right? But what are, in your opinion, the key components of an effective outreach strategies to angel investors? I know you just mentioned, for example, I see that you've invested 25K in XYZ companies. I think we're in a very similar vertical, or in a similar industry, just a different vertical. Are you interested? Question mark. But what else would you say? For example, if we're not going for your angel investor that is unknown, but more so the known ones, what do you think would allow someone to stand out?
So yeah, it's a good question. I think ultimately, like doing some of this cold outbound is part of an overall toolbox of fundraising, of which you need to use absolutely everything. So you need to be leveraging your network. You need to be asking other founders for introductions. You need to be leveraging your client base, for introductions or even capital if you're a consumer business. So outside of all those things, I think cold outbound is a really important component. It's not the only one, but it is an important component. I think if you are trying to target a really famous investor that you like or you followed, doing a little bit of extra work on, finding someone in their network and asking them for an introduction is really valuable because, and I've done that and I've helped people do that. And I think it's really effective just because if someone's gone out of their way to, you always double opt in on introductions, but if someone's gone out of their way and said, hey, I'd like to introduce you to this company, what do you think? And 9 times out of 10, if not 99 times out of 100, that investor will say, well, look, this founder's gone out of his way to try and get me in front of this company. I'm just going to give that person the courtesy of a call. And so it works really effectively. So if you're the other founder on the other end, reaching out to, if someone asks me for an introduction to a certain person, I will always give it. And like very few founders do this. And this is the one thing I've learned actually from being part of accelerator networks and things like this is I could probably spot the outliers very quickly because they're the founders, not just in, I suppose, in accelerators, but in the wider founder ecosystem. I can kind of spot who the outliers will be just because they're asking me, like, can you introduce me to this? Can you help me with this? Very few people do that, but the ones that do are the ones that end up succeeding. So I suppose more specifically on outreach, cold outreach, I think if you're doing it more, I suppose more broadly, there are tools that you can use, but the key is really just to get started. So many founders paralyze themselves on not having the perfect deck or the perfect model or whatever it is. Just get out there, I think is probably the main thing. And not worry too much because people have a glancing, they'll have a glance at your deck and they won't think much to it. It's just a fact of life. You're in a competition for capital, really.
I met founder. I'm not going to name them, but brilliant strategy that they had. They wanted to speak to 3 angel investors in their industry, well known in their industry, but not necessarily outside of it, but still very hard to get to. So what they did is they started a podcast about the industry to be key opinion leaders, right? And within 5 months, he or she had 3 of those angel investors on a podcast. Secured one investment from one of them after the podcast and just had a chat. Very smart.
Whatever it takes, that's awesome.
Exactly, whatever it takes. And on top of that, the podcast ended up bringing them about 10 to 12 clients. So
wow, it's amazing.
It's crazy.
That's really impressive.
Anything it takes. Look, now we've talked about outreach, we've talked about pitfalls. Let's talk about automation tools and recommended software. So obviously with the advent of GPT-4, just at my level, I've used it a lot, right? But I'd be really interested to find out how, what essential automation tools you recommend to founders for managing just general investor relations.
Yeah, so I mean, investor relations is a separate topic, as in like, how you're updating your existing investors. But if we're thinking about like getting people, so what we have found works really well. It works well for our outbound strategy as well to winning clients. But we use a combination of 3 things really, very simply. We use LinkedIn Sales Navigator, pretty important part of any sort of sales stack. We use Apollo. Apollo is really good. And the one I have running at the moment is a platform called Meet Alfred. And that is, it's just a very simple, you have to pay for it, but it's a very simple outbounding tool where you can combine LinkedIn and email cadences. So you sort of do both at the same time. And and it works. Where, you know, we've won a lot of clients through cold email outbound, and these will be lenders, you know, funds, and it works. It's a strategy that works. So those are probably the platforms that we like the most. And you know, if you're short of capital, you can always, you know, if you set yourself a target of 100 cold emails a day, that adds up. It compounds. You know, you can do it.
Where does
But
Scribe come into this?
so obviously, you know, if you're a subscriber to us, you know, we're providing the data, we're providing the information. So we're allowing people to, you know, have LinkedIn profiles for angel investors, and allowing to set up some of this outbound.
Right. And look, keeping on Scribe and time-saving automation tools.
Yeah.
Can you discuss a bit more about how you guys significantly, first of all, cut down time spent on finding and reaching out to potential investors? And what feedback have you received from founders about time saved?
Yeah, so I think fundraising is something founders on the whole don't want to do. And so they tend to put it off, which ends up being fatal for their businesses in some cases. So I think the value that we bring is, like, we've started providing founders with curated lists of investors that we think are right for their business. We've done that in quite a few cases, and it works really well because they don't even have to spend the time. You know, we know our platform inside out, so we're able to cut and paste sort of the right investors for their business. Yeah, I suppose it's obviously saving a lot of time. It's giving people a bit of a focus as well. You know, spend the time, set up your outbound. They carve out a couple of hours. I know one founder that does it Tuesdays and Thursdays, and he sets up 2 hours Tuesday, 2 hours Thursday to do his outbound.
Yeah.
And that works really well for him, and he's met loads of investors that way. Yeah, I think, yeah, I suppose that's really the value proposition. But we also have founders who use the platform for DD on investors as well. Well, they'll go in and see, is this person really who they say they are? That works pretty well as well.
Yeah, at Wholesale Investor, we say that fundraising is a sales and marketing initiative at the end of the day, because it's very similar. It's outbound lead generation if you can, right, to generate enough interest, and then kind of closing the pipeline is very similar. And
exactly the same. Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing I would add to that is, like, I think people need to see you everywhere. They need to see you on LinkedIn. They need to see, maybe not Twitter, but if they see you in their own space, LinkedIn, like the messages and the email, and then they see you on LinkedIn, then they see your company on LinkedIn, you know, you change people's perception really quickly, and that's powerful as a founder.
And just a bit of a bless you.
Thanks.
Just a bit of a left field question here. Have you know a lot of founders. Have you ever had founders who cold call investors?
Yes. Yeah. I've heard a few. I've heard it working really well, to be honest. Yeah. It does work. It takes a proper sales brave founder to do that, I think. The difficulty always is, can you get that number? And I don't play in that game. I don't know. You know, there are probably providers out there that will do phone numbers for you. The question is, how do you get hold of that number and how that goes? But I have heard founders doing it, and it does work really well.
Yeah. And look, many of our audience are keen on data-driven decision making. How does Scribe offer, I know the different kinds of insights you guys offer, but that data, it's not that it's not available, but it's hard to compile, and that's why you guys exist, right? Can you give an example of how this data has been a game changer for maybe not necessarily in the realm of founders, but for other clients that you guys have?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose that the most obvious use case is the core IP that we have is our ability to structure that data. And so we license that to LP, so limited partners, so people who invest into funds. We sell in, we have a lot of clients in that space, and they use our platform to pull information about their underlying portfolio companies and the fund performance data. and they use that to structure all of their information. Now that's private to them, but we do the processing and the structuring. And so that's like a really horrible problem that they don't want to solve, and other companies haven't wanted to solve either. So we do I suppose I don't know how to describe it, but we do the kind of grunt work that would be offshore, done usually in India or somewhere like that. We do that work with technology, and then that allows them to build like a proper data strategy on top of it. So that's one use case. So we're using AI to sort of pull out all these numbers, structure them in a way that they can then use. In terms of the data in our platform, SES funds are using the same data to find investors for their SES funds. They're also using it to find the next fund investment because they can see which companies are getting funded. Lenders will use the platform to find, or rather private equity will use the platform to search for companies that are growing at a certain growth rate. Lots of different use cases, all with the same kind of underlying data and principle, I suppose. Like any data company, I mean, there are a lot of providers out there. What we're doing isn't particularly new. It's just finding maybe data points that are underserved or that have use cases.
Yeah, that's very true. And apart from Scribe, apart from everything we've been talking about, just on a general note, what are your thoughts on technology-driven efficiency, such as AI tools in general fundraising? And how do you think the market, and what I mean by the market, I mean the investors, are going to adapt to it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I suppose what I would say is that if I take it on a company level first and then maybe like a wider level, on a very small scale, an investor has very limited touch points to figure out how you are as a founder, because ultimately at an early stage they're investing in you and a founding team and your ability to execute on that plan. So if you are using these tools to outbound and these kind of things, what an investor's perception is going to be, well, presumably you're doing that in your company as well. And so that reflects well on the founder, I think, if you're leveraging AI to find new things, find new data points to engage them in outbound, things like that. I suppose on a wider level of fundraising per se is that I think AI and the tools like ourselves that are getting built on top of that technology opens out the world in a way that just wasn't possible even 3-4 years ago. And what I mean by that is, like, if you're a first-time founder and you don't know where to start, all the data is available at your fingertips. And that's I suppose the power of that technology is like knowing how to leverage that and how to use it.
Yeah.
I suppose longer term, does every investor want to get a cold email all the time from all founders? Yeah, probably not, and that becomes a bit of a problem in itself. But
I think what will happen is we'll probably see a counter tool to Apollo that these guys who receive a lot of email have employed.
yeah, exactly. But ultimately, if this tooling grows the amount of money going into early stage companies and innovation, that's good for everyone.
Of course.
So that's the flip side to it.
Yeah. And look, I have 2 more questions for you, and then if it's possible, we'd love to see a short demo. For founders who are new to fundraising, the process obviously is daunting. Well, it's not daunting at first. Then once they get into it, then it becomes daunting probably. So in maybe 1 or 2 sentences, how does Scribe simplify this journey for first-time founders?
So I think it gives them the confidence to know who's actually investing. I think that's really I suppose the one thing, and it gives them a playbook that they can use to find investors.
Yeah.
But very simple.
And looking ahead, obviously the UK is a very special position in that we have the company's house, right? Which I'm guessing that's where most of the data comes from. How are external markets structured in terms of that data? And is there plans for Scribe to go abroad and develop that abroad in terms of the data?
Yeah, absolutely. So registries vary. European Union kind of like, so specifically France and Germany have this data. It's something that we're exploring in the moment. Northern Europe, these registries are a little bit easier to deal with from a technical perspective. Southern Europe's harder. Like Spain, Italy, they're not as easy, not as straightforward. But yeah, we do have plans to cover those countries. I mean, ultimately, the big opportunity is really for us anyway, in terms of structuring the unstructured, is the US is a huge market for this. It's very much a small sort of growing market. It's less relevant for founders. But for us as a company, that's a huge opportunity as well. So it's sort of anchored around US and Europe, I would say.
Yeah, because Australia has a very similar structure to Companies House.
That's news to me, so maybe we should do Australia next.
I think it's almost the same
Mhm.
in terms of the data structure. So that could be something.
Well, thanks, Hugo. Yeah,
No problem.
I'll check it out.
And in terms of what else you guys have planned apart from maybe expansions, but just maybe next product developments or anything that you're looking for in the future, looking to build?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, our mission is really around insight. Like we're developing insight. So the way that I think about us over the next 5-10 years is how can we use technology to create insight that helps people? And insight specifically, we think the biggest gap is really in private markets and private companies. And so one of the things that we're going to be launching over the next few months is generating written text about companies. Now, that use case is less relevant for founders, but it's incredibly relevant for risk departments at banks, funds, writing investment memos, all of this kind of stuff. So ChatGPT is amazing for, information that is widely available, but it really falls down when it's either pointed at private data or it gets poor quite quickly. So one of the things that we're building is something that is anchored on built on all of the information that we have available to us. So for example, I mean, we've got loads of ideas, none of which we've sort of launched. But even just a quick chatbot to help founders find investors, that's something we can do. Give me 10 investors I can speak to of this, tell me how to do it, all of these kind of things. Or helping banks and funds to write their investment memos faster with our data. So a few things on the horizon that we're kind of working on that we hope to sort of launch soon.
Maybe with the newly released GPT bots, which you can, I think, anchor into different APIs. That could be the solver there. But
yeah, lots of promise. They're not quite there yet, but lots of promise.
Lots of promise, exactly. Look, that brings me to the end of this question and answer. Do you have time for the demo?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, firstly, thank you for having me. But yeah, I'll give a super quick sort of 1 minute fly through, and this will hopefully show
Brilliant.
the
Let's
value.
maybe not do SaaS manufacturing.
Yeah, that's particularly specific. Hopefully, you can see my screen here.
Yeah, all good.
Awesome, cool. Yeah, so very simply, two sides to our data set. And I'm going to start here. This is the bit that founders find most useful. So this is a list of companies updated in real time based on, investor name, company name, ticket size, investor type, industry, corporation valuation. So typically the way founders will use this is, let's say I want to find maybe SaaS companies, as we mentioned, or others like consumer or hardware, robotics, things like that. I'm going to search for angels that have invested at least 25K. So what this gives me, I can sort of filter, is a list of people that I can then save to a list. And I've effectively got my outbound list here that is a series of highly targeted names of people that I can go after, so I can search them on LinkedIn and do various things like that. So yeah, that's our founder offering. If I think about the rest of the platform, which is a much wider database, but it's with a focus on privately held companies in the UK. One thing you can do, I'm just going to pick one here. This is our platform. that kind of more funds are using in banks, but you have financial data about that company, and importantly, who the shareholders are. So this is a cap table, but obviously just the one entity there. Yeah, that's affected. But if this had 10 shareholders, you'd see sort of mix around the edges. So I'll just show you one I looked at earlier, actually, which was so Angel's Den is a sort of another player in the space. You can see here their shareholders and the founders and things like this. So these are all most likely angel investors. So
Brilliant.
That's effectively it. But yeah, the 30-second demo.
It's easy to say effectively it. You've built something, again, remarkable. Look, Rob, it's been an absolute pleasure. For anyone watching, please find Rob's description, well, the description, Rob's details, Scribe's login or website in the description below. And yeah, thank you very much for joining us, Rob. It's been a
Awesome.
pleasure.
Good stuff. Thank you very much, Hugo. Enjoyed the chat.
Thanks.